So our first regional presentation is going to be on coastal Louisiana by Dr. Denise Reed, who is the Chief Scientist for Water Institute of the Gulf. And Denise is well known to all of us. She's internationally known for her work, and she's also been a friend to those of us who are interested in good science in the Bay Delta. She's served on a number of review panels here that have been extremely helpful to the managing agencies. And Denise, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Mike. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We had a great field trip yesterday. Mike organised just excellent weather for being out at this time of year on the water. It was good to see everybody. So I'm going to take the extra few minutes that we have because but I am going to try to provide allow some time for questions at the end. My job today is to talk about science in coastal Louisiana. This is the kind of general outline that Mike just told that we were all the speakers were given. I've taken the liberty of flipping these first two because I think understanding the issues that we confront and what the management challenges are is important to try to think about how the programs work. So I'm going to talk about, I wonder if maybe the lights could go down just a bit. If somebody could do that, that might help a little bit. Thank you, that's great. I'm going to talk about coastal Louisiana, the delta of the Mississippi River, a very young landscape built by the Mississippi over the last 6,000 to 7,000 years through the process of delta avulsion, a pretty well-known landscape, very extensive, extending from the border with Texas on the west to the border with Mississippi on the east. I'm going to just take a few minutes here just to give you an idea of what it's like. It's huge, and it's largely still in natural ecosystem. It's not been totally changed in the way that the delta here has. And so we have swamps, we have marshes, extensive millions of acres of wetlands. Some of them are in good shape. Some of them are in not so good shape for a number of reasons, which I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time going into today. That's a totally separate talk. We also have barrier beaches, barrier islands around the Gulf shoreline, again, which are very low-lying and very threatened by hurricanes and other kinds of impacts like that. It's also a coast where people live and work. And so it's renowned, probably, hopefully, nationally and globally for its sportsman's paradise, for recreational fishing particularly, but also just culture and environment. It's also a working coast. The oil and gas industry has been a key player in coastal issues for good and bad for going on a century now, 80 years or so. And commercial fishing is also a very important part of the ecosystem, but also of coastal communities. And people live down there. People live in communities stretched out along the bayou ridges and on the higher land and have lived there for centuries. Some of those communities have moved over the years in response to hurricane impacts, and many of them now survive behind levees and structures to help them have something left after the storm goes away. So this is the system that we're looking at here. The main issue that I'm going to focus on here today is coastal land loss and the idea that wetlands and barrier islands are being lost to open water. There are a few landscapes left that look like the one in the top left here. An overflight of coastal Louisiana will see many, many pictures like those that you see here. And there's a reason I show this picture a lot. This is from these two slides I took like almost 30 years ago when I first got to coastal Louisiana. But I would say there's a reason that this guy is standing on this boardwalk here, because if he steps off, he's going to be up to his waist in the muck. Even where there is soil and wetland plants, in many places there's really not much of a solid substrate beneath. This problem has been quantified, and for the USGS team here in the room, we are optimistic that the USGS group in Louisiana that produces these statistics for us will be actually coming out with an updated set of statistics any time that will show change through 2015. But you can see that we really are losing dramatic areas, and this is changed to open water. So something that was a wetland, something that was a barrier island, something that was a natural landform, if you like, is being converted to open water. This is not land loss to golf courses and Walmarts. This is land loss to open water. This is probably an easier to see picture. This is 1932 to 2010 from the same data set. The red are areas that were land, as I just described, and changed to open water. There are several areas that you can see on here that are green, particularly around the mouth of the Wax Lake Outlet and the Atchafalaya River over here, and a few areas down here in the Bird's Foot. I haven't actually done much geography for you. This is the border with Mississippi, and this is the border with Texas. So it's the entire southern part of the state here. New Orleans is about here, and Baton Rouge is about there. Lake Charles, the major city in southwest Louisiana, is over here. So there's also this kind of underlying issue of people and economy on the coast and the threat of hurricane storm surges. This is a prediction that was done as part of the 2012 Coastal Master Plan. I'm going to talk more about the master planning process and the role of science here. This is a prediction. Oh, excuse me. This is a prediction. I've got to go backwards. There we go. Wrong button, sorry. Of how deep the water would be for the 100-year coastal flood event. So this is not riverine flooding, this is storm surge flooding coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. I know you can't see this very well, it's in feet, but the redder color over here is 20 to 25 foot, and the lighter color is up to 5 feet. And so this is an estimate of the economic damages associated with that flooding by 2061. One of the reasons I mention this is not just to kind of, the big figures and the numbers, but one of the key things I think about science and one of the contributions we've been able to make to the discourse around coastal Louisiana is to use our science and our knowledge about the system not to describe its current status or how it's changed from the past, but to think about what it's going to look like in the future. And this idea of predicting and thinking ahead in order that policy and management decisions can be appropriately laid out in advance, as opposed to being reactive, which is very much the kind of Hurricane Katrina story of New Orleans, is, I think, one of the key roles for science in Louisiana, and I think actually one of the key roles in large-scale ecosystem management across the country. So this is the storm surge map from our 2012 Coastal Master Plan. The 2017 Coastal Master Plan is actually going to appear in January, but here is a sneak preview of the red map of what we think is going to happen in coastal Louisiana in 50 years from now, if with a relatively high sea level rise rate, but not by any means a worst case scenario. And so this is the context. This is the context for planning. All of the red on here would be lost, right? And so that means that the Gulf of Mexico is at the door of Lake Charles. There is very little outboard around New Orleans left. My house is right here. So folks like me are going to be in trouble. And one of the other roles of science is then to communicate what could happen, but also then to help scientifically think about what the options are. Is there anything we can do about this? How can we use our science and our understanding of how the system works to prevent this happening? Can we prevent it happening? To what degree and where? And so the policy decisions are going to be about investments and choices, but the science can really be about what can or could be done. So what could be done, and this is not a new problem. We've known something about this issue in coastal Louisiana for a while, and so now I'm going to just quickly go through where we've been on this issue, and I could talk for a couple of hours on this, but I got to Louisiana in 1986. There's no cause-effect relationship in this, but when I got there, there had been a recognition of the issue and a kind of grassroots effort to try to mobilize some investments, some policy decisions to actually take some action. And so we were all, I think, very pleased in 1990 when the Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection and Restoration Act was passed, federal statute, which provides of the order of $40 to $50 million a year for coastal restoration in Louisiana. It comes from the small engine gas tax, if anybody's interested in this. It's independent of appropriations, which is really a great way to get federal money. And it was focused on vegetative wetlands, which was one of the primary kind of things that's going on in the coast, and very much a project-by-project kind of development. It led to a comprehensive plan in 1993, which was really just a series, a wish list of projects. It was just a wish list. There wasn't much else to it. That was followed, well, a realization came out of that process in the early 90s, where we realized that $40 to $50 million a year was just not making any difference in this problem at all. You know, we really were rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic at that point. So in the mid-90s, there was an effort to kind of do a more of a strategic planning process to really think about what the coast needed and start to play offense, if you like, rather than defense, rather than trying to hold back the sea. Let's see what we can do to actually get this system functioning again. That was a Coast 2050 plan, came out in 1998. It was much more solidly scientifically based in general understanding. The decades of research on the coast was really, I think, brought to bear in terms of these underlying thinking about what needed to be done. But it was very much strategic. It wasn't a plan that could be readily implemented. The next step on that was taken with a joint federal feasibility study. This is probably a 2004 Chiefs report I'm looking at here. A comprehensive approach. One thing I should say, actually, in the 1998 report, we did a back-of-the-envelope price tag for the things that we were discussing, and it came to $14 billion. And the next plan along, the Louisiana Coastal Area Plan, the Chiefs report there in 2004, actually articulated that in a little bit more detail and had a price tag of somewhere above, somewhere in the order of $11 to $20 billion, and that draft EIS or draft documentation was sent to Washington, and frankly, nobody in the administration in Washington had the stomach for that kind of program to be authorized at that point. So it was very much a scaled down program by the time it was authorized, down to $2 billion, and again, really a selection of projects. Post-Katrina, things changed a little bit, and there was some Corps of Engineers thinking about what needed to be done, but it was very much focused on the protection side of the house rather than the restoration of the ecosystem. On the state side, however, and I go through this just because, as Mike was talking about, this idea of federal versus state and where do the resources come from, and what are the kind of policy contexts that we want to use our science within. The state, after Katrina, did a number of important things, one of which was to join the program that had been considering the restoration of the ecosystem and the coastal land loss problem with the program that was designed to protect people from storm surge flooding. And it also called for a comprehensive master plan to be developed, which was to be, by statute, updated every 5 years. The first one in 2007 was developed in those kind of the year or so after Katrina was really a kind of which way is up kind of time in coastal Louisiana. But we got a plan together, and it's very strategic. It was kind of a little bit of a chicken in a pot for chicken in every pot. You know, everybody kind of got something in that plan, and it wasn't, again, a plan that could be implemented. The big switch, I think, and I think the big opportunity for science, which in Louisiana, which I'm pleased to say I think we rose to, was a challenge that was put to the technical community actually by the governor's office, saying everybody is coming to my door saying, I want this project, I want that project, I want this project, I want that project. I have no idea, well, I didn't say it quite like that, but, which ones should we do? Are they all good? You know, how do we work out what are the keepers? Which ones to do first? And so this challenge was presented to several of us who had been working and being involved in these plans over the years to think about how to do it. And so the 2012 plan is built on science and engineering. We evaluated hundreds of projects. I'm going to discuss a little bit how the science came together on this in a minute to come up with a plan, and we're now in the process of updating that to 2017. That will come out in January. So the plan has specific objectives, and so the challenge. So it's not just any old science, right? It's not just about any old knowledge. It's about tuning what we know about the system to evaluate different ideas about what could be done relative to some very specific objectives. I won't get into this now, but I think one of the things that had confounded some of those earlier planning efforts was a lack of sufficiently specific objectives. We had gone through a long planning effort on where an objective was improve fish and wildlife habitat, right? You know, it's kind of really like mum and apple pie, right? Who's going to object to that? But, you know, you can't actually improve brown shrimp and alligators, right, in the same place, right? You have to choose. And so the idea that within the context of this, that there would be, I don't know, we've got them some slight differences in alignment here, but you can see the principle here, that we actually had to think about how we could use our scientific knowledge about the system in a way that would enable the decision makers to make that kind of choice. Am I going to do an action that promotes alligators, or am I going to do an action that promotes brown shrimp? With their eyes wide open. So I think that that's kind of the role of science. And so in brief then, a whole bunch of projects were thrown up by the state or various entities, and the job of the group of scientists that was assembled was to evaluate them. And this is what came out at the end of the pot, was actually a series of projects all across the coast, the cost of which, were they to be implemented in 2010 dollars, would be $50 billion. So, you know, the magnitude of one of the other kind of pieces of this is that is this gradual recognition over a period of 20 years or so, 25 years, of the devil really is in the details, and understanding the details and the scientific understanding of the system and its dynamics and how those need to be changed in order to get a more optimistic future, then comes with a substantially increasing price tag. So the science enterprise structure is one of the things that we've, you know, Mike has asked us to talk about. It's our background on kind of where we are. How do we organize ourselves to do this? Well, not very well is probably the better, in an ad hoc manner. I don't think we have the solution. I think we've been lucky in the way in which we've been able, as a scientific community, been able to contribute. There's a lot of good university research that has gone on for a long time. There's a lot of work done in agencies like the USGS. We also have research institutes like that one that I work for, and other kind of NGOs and environmental groups that do support scientific endeavors. And actually, a lot of the technical work that we do, that I consider science research, really kind of cutting edge, is also done in the private sector as well. And so I think that even though I can see all of these people making a contribution, it's not obvious that there is any real coordination except around any one specific issue. There isn't one way we come together. We really are extremely lucky that we have decades of research on this. Being on the delta of the 6th largest river in the world really has been a kind of scientific point of interest for decades. And so we are able to leverage all of that understanding. I think we're actually able to leverage the knowledge base from university research better than we are able to leverage the current skills of the university research community, if you like. And so, you know, this is really not about me or any of my colleagues as much as it is about the work that had come before. We also have some important other kind of foundational issues that have helped. And one thing I mentioned earlier, I'm sorry, really is too much detail here. I know I'm going into too much detail. But that very, very first act that I told you about, 1990, the Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection and Restoration Act, focused on vegetated wetlands, called for a scientific evaluation to be conducted every 3 years, I believe. I mean, it actually says scientific evaluation in the statute, which is really quite good. Focus on vegetated wetlands. Well, one of the things that eventually happened with that was the establishment of this very extensive coastal monitoring system focused on vegetated wetlands. You will note that there are no stations in the open water bodies here. It really is all about the wetlands. So there are 390 monitoring stations across the coastal wetlands of Louisiana, funded by, for the most part, that Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection and Restoration Act, which continues to do work 20-odd years on, and continues to provide tens of millions of dollars for restoration every year, and including supporting really important things like this. We also have, again, stimulated by the agencies, thinking about a system-wide assessment and monitoring program. The idea that we need to get beyond vegetated wetlands, we need to think about all different aspects of our coastal system is now something that is very much on the radar screen of the agencies. And so I think, we've got this base of information that's come from the university community, and we've actually got some initiatives within the agency teams working on coastal Louisiana that are focused on providing a really important baseline of information. So where does the funding come from? So I that was meant to be a part about how are we organized. Well, we're not very organized, but we do have a few things that have come together quite accidentally and quite well. So funding for science. Funding for research, for university research, is frankly thin on the ground. And there are no dedicated funds. I've put Sea Grant up here, which I think does a valiant effort and has done a valiant effort over the years with fairly limited resources of the order of, $2 million a year and a host of things that National Sea Grant requires them to address, of actually, chipping away at this and increasing understanding about a few of the issues. Louisiana researchers have done a good job, I think, taking advantage of different national funding sources. In those early years, some of the early work on the Mississippi Delta, a lot of that was funded by the Office of Naval Research, who wanted to understand deltaic processes. A lot of it was funded by oil and gas companies who wanted to understand deltas and reservoirs and sedimentary dynamics and things like that. But a lot of that early work, was funded in an earlier time, and those resources are not kind of ongoing or necessarily currently available. That programmatic monitoring is really important. It provides us with a good, solid baseline, and those 390 stations have now been on the ground for 10 years, which now means we really are starting to have a very rich and available pool of data across the coast. But I think the main thing is for us is that we now actually have opportunities to develop and apply science, not within the context of a science program or a specifically science labeled entity or activity, but within the context of actually moving the restoration forward, project-specific opportunities. So I'm just going to kind of cover a few of those in very general detail. And excuse me, sorry. I keep hitting the wrong button. There we go, backwards. So this is the 2017 the busy slide, right? But this is the slide that the state folks used to talk about the 2017 Coastal Master Plan, and they identify three kind of basic elements of this. One is what are the ideas that want to be evaluated? What are the projects? And there's this predictive modeling in the middle, and then there's a planning tool over here, which is an optimization kind of applied math scheme. And so I do know that this side of this operation over here has cost of the order of $10 million has been expended on that over the last 3 to 4 years. That's probably the amount of money it will be by the time the master plan is delivered to the legislature in 2017. A lot of that money comes through us and at the Water Institute, and it goes out to 14 different subcontractors. We have an advisory panel. We have included expert review on key reports that are generated through that. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute because I'm pretty excited about that. But the other thing is actually moving, and this you're not meant to read this slide, but is that when a project gets included in the master plan, it's a concept. It's kind of risen to the top of the pile. It then has to go through detailed planning and engineering and design before any kind of dirt is moved. And these we are in the process of planning and then now in engineering and design on some major diversions of Mississippi River water out into the estuary. And so this is a kind of, flipping heck, excuse me. This is the process diagram. This is the process diagram for, you know, for this kind of, okay, who does what, and there's permits, and there's, but you'll see in the middle here, there's an awful lot of modeling in the middle here to go through a decision to advance to a decision to advance. A key kind of step here is, okay, we've got these things that we're thinking about. Are we going to take them to the next level? And what you see in here is an awful lot of analysis being done. And that is really an opportunity for the scientific community and for science to come together to inform the decision. And so a lot of funding is associated with that. Another source of funding, we're still on funding, is, and Alyssa Dousman with the Restore Council is going to spend more time on this tomorrow. But we now actually in Louisiana have more money than we ever thought we would have to build projects, importantly to build projects. And there is actually some dedicated money for science, and this is as a result of the Deepwater Horizon incident in 2010. And there's a few things highlighted in here, and there are civil penalties, there are criminal penalties, and there's natural resource damages and things like that. But I've highlighted and blown up a little bit in font size a few things. These funds over here are actually for science. There are 5 centers of, there are 5 states in the Gulf Coast. Each has a center of excellence, at least one center of excellence. And there's $133 million in centers of excellence. That's $133 million over 15 years for 5 groups. So in Louisiana, it's $26 million, but over 15 years. So that really is not a huge amount of money for science. The NOAA Science Program down here also has $133 million, which it is distributing again over 15 years through a competitive grants process. So there's an ongoing competitive grants process there for research relative to Gulf restoration. But the project money that I said we have this opportunity to kind of develop and apply science within the context of projects. There's $1.3 billion in here under the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And then under other kind of monies over here, under the natural resource damage assessments, a lot of that will be coming to Louisiana as well. And then Alyssa, this is the Restore Act and the council component over here that I think Alyssa's going to talk a little bit more about tomorrow. So there are resources available now, but most of those available resources are to build projects. We are, as the Center of Excellence, about to issue a request for proposals for $3 million. Louisiana has decided that its Center of Excellence, the Water Institute of the Gulf, competed to be the Center of Excellence in Louisiana. We'll be getting an RFP out next month for $3 million. That's the biggest RFP for research on coastal Louisiana that I ever remember in 30 years. It's not enough. But hopefully we'll be able to make a dent in this. It is, again, research to support the implementation of the Coastal Master Plan. So how do we make this science helpful? How do we bring it together to actually make a difference to a decision maker? This is a pretty crude kind of identification of scientific tools and probably something that we could discuss more over wine, but I don't really want to do that. I want to say modeling has been the thing that really, I think, has enabled us to bring ourselves together, and this idea of thinking about the future. And so in the master plan, we had to evaluate hundreds of different projects, and we did that specifically by developing, we had specific things that we had to analyze too. We had to analyze about land, and we had to analyze about expected annual damages. And so we needed to really develop a set of tools and apply our information to a very specific end that CPRA, as the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, was looking for. One of the key things that we did was we built a specific modeling approach to do this. We didn't go out through the university community and say, okay, who's got a good predictive model of this part of the state or that part of the state? We had actually done that in some of the previous efforts in the early 2000s, and it hadn't really been very successful because the research models that people had weren't necessarily applicable to the application that we had in hand. So we built this approach. This is the 2017 version of the approach. It's a simplified coastal model, but it covers the whole coast. and it covers lots of process interactions within the natural environment. It covers open water processes, barrier island processes, wetland processes, exchanges of salt, or fluctuations in water level, movements of sediment in a very, very, it's a, we capture all of these things. The physics is simplified, but it's essentially a mass balance approach. There are 900 compartments across the coast that kind of characterize the way in which the water moves. And then once we get the water moving and the sediment moving and the salt moving around, then we have simple, and this is kind of the architecture of one of the compartments. So there are some kind of interactions within the compartments, and not just between the compartments, but it's very simplified. This is not our best, most sophisticated model. It is one that is tailored to this very specific kind of purpose that we had in mind. And obviously we've got a lot of the wetland vegetation work in here has only been possible because we have data from those 390 monitoring stations across the coastal wetlands of the coast. And we have a lot of issues with how we kind of resolve different spatial scales of resolution, which is probably too detailed for this audience. It's not the best. There's an awful lot of assumptions in here. I probably know where all the challenges are in it, but it certainly seems to meet the purpose and was really a key thing underlying the 2012 Coastal Master Plan and will be the key thing underlying the 2017 Master Plan, and we have been able to continue to develop it because it has been so useful. And that $10 million for the 2017 plan would not have been invested in the team unless we had actually shown that we could provide value added for the 2012 plan. We're doing some more detailed work on sediment diversions too. I put this in because these are actually this is the Mississippi River just below New Orleans. These are the planned diversions. Diversions in Louisiana are restoration. It's a good thing there, or theoretically it's a good thing. That's what we're trying to test. And so these are really quite large. 75,000 cubic feet per second. I think that might be the 5th largest river in the US once we actually get that happen. So these are very big structures. The cost estimate on this is to actually build the structure that will do this is of the order of $1 billion. So it's a large investment that needs to be considered. We know a lot about deltas, remember, and so our job is to leverage that information and leverage that information into the kind of detailed level analysis that we need for engineering design. So this is a much, much more detailed model. But we've pushed that envelope, and we've also, I think one of the important things I want to say on this is that these opportunities have forced us or allowed us to work across disciplines very, very closely. And it has been uncomfortable, but it has been the secret to success. And so on the last one, you saw the water and the salt and the plants and all the habitats and the beach processes working together. On this one, it's the hydrodynamics, it's the water quality, it's the plants, it's the morphodynamics, the change over time, and it's actually, although this is not really my area to talk about, it's actually kind of feeding into food webs. So actually asking questions, being asked questions that are of that scope, and having the resources being made available at a kind of scale of magnitude that is reasonable. I think we built this model with a large team of people in about 18 months. And probably with of the order of $3 to $5 million. So it was doable. Just an example of the kind of questions that we're being asked. Okay, are these things effective? Can they build land? I mean, we know conceptually they can, but we know a lot about deltas and how they work. But how much land would you actually build with 75,000 CFS at that location versus that location? So we can predict, as you saw before in the red map, what would happen if we don't do the project. And then, okay, if we do 4 of these diversions, what do we get? We get the green. If we only do 2 of them, what do we get? Right, we're talking about $1 billion of investments to build these things. And so the investment in this kind of team building and this modeling for this kind of science application here is really, a very minor part of the overall project cost, and I think has done a long way to moving these things forward in the decision-making framework. So just quickly at the end, I don't think I haven't got any flags yet for being over time, so I guess obviously I've still got time. So the last thing that Mike asked us to talk about is communication and co-production. And I'm hoping there's nobody here from Louisiana, because I'm going to be pretty honest about this one. How is communication about science managed? I thought that word managed, I thought about that for a while. What does that really mean? What are the mechanisms? We don't really have many specific mechanisms. Obviously, one of the things I've just been kind of going through at probably more length than you really needed to hear is how we've been able to kind of get science and make it useful and move it forward, make advances, I think, scientific advances, within the context of these projects and these very specific needs that the state has. You know, it's very top-down. So in the master plan, this is like all the people that work on the master plan, so it's very much kind of, there's private sector in here, there's federal agencies, there's universities, large team of people are working on this master plan analysis that I just described. But it's pretty much prescribed, the boards are held pretty narrowly by the state. It says on here that the CPRA and the Water Institute of the Gulf direct and coordinate, this is our official slide, directs and coordinates model improvements and analysis, but I'd say CPRA directs and we coordinate. We're like, oh, well, we could do this. That would be really, you know what I mean? It's like we get excited about things and it's like, no, we don't actually need that, or no, we don't think we need that. And I think that one of the challenges in this great opportunity that we've had is, and all the knowledge that we already have about the system, is to make sure that we can still be innovative and creative, and that having opportunities for science and scientists to really kind of advance and expand and increase thinking, as opposed to, not opposed to, in addition to just to really applying in a very, very exciting way, I think is something that you know, we don't really have that. It feels, perhaps that's because I'm kind of in the middle of this, but it feels very top-down sometimes. I'm like, well, I'm not quite sure why you want to do that, but okay, let's do it. Another kind of thing is co-production used or encouraged in your major programs. I think one of the things that when we work in the context of this, moving these projects from idea to being in the plan to kind of, you know, eventually being on the ground and moving dirt and breaking ground and getting really excited about actually moving 75,000 CFS of water, we have to work very closely with the private sector. We are not doing the engineering. There are engineers working on this project on the science side and on the analytical side, but they're not really doing the engineering. We're working very closely with the private sector, the design firms that are doing this. And therefore, we're answering pretty specific questions. This is a good collaboration. I don't know if it's really what you mean by co-production, but, you know, how deep should the intake go? Okay, let's really think about that. Let's understand what we know about river dynamics. Let's put that together in a way that we can use. How much erosion is going to occur in the basin when all this water moves out there? Okay, what are the key uncertainties? Let's go take some cores. Let's really try to understand those substrate dynamics and that erodibility factor. And so, you know, working very closely often in that context with the private sector firms. And I think that really has worked very well. Communication. I think you have a science conference, very successful one. Actually, I think ours is really modeled after yours. And of course, we're probably all modeled after the Everglades. But we have a biennial conference, which really is hugely successful now and really is a great venue for sharing. We do have a few occasions where there's kind of public engagements on science, not very, very many. But we have actually started to do a lot of kind of webinars and recorded webinars and things like that I think have gone a long way to, as well as giving presentations to stakeholder groups and things. Transparency. We do a fair amount of external expert engagement, reports, reviews. We have this kind of approach, which I think is really useful, which is this kind of over-the-shoulder review. is what they call it. Came up actually through the Corps of Engineers process, where you don't wait till the end to get people in. You actually have people kind of looking at what you're doing on a regular basis and kind of providing advice and guidance along the way. That's pretty helpful. And actually CPRA does a fantastic job with what they call their Coastal Information Management System of really, which I guess the back end is probably managed by the USGS, which gets all that monitoring data available to people. So just some kind of thoughts here. I hope I've touched on all of Mike's points. I hope I have. You know, a few kind of closing thoughts. I think I've touched on most of these. We don't have any formal mechanisms. We've tried a lot over the years to get university collaboration and coordination. A lot of university scientists have recognized that, you know, this is the research opportunity of our lifetime, of multiple generations to work on this. How can we, as a university community, come together and provide a kind of collective platform for those like federal and state agencies who are trying to address this problem? We have not been successful at that. We have tried several times. I can go into the details of those if anybody's interested. And actually that lack of success is one of the reasons why the Water Institute was established as a kind of convening body as much as anything else. I think that we don't have many opportunities to synthesize. I think that some of the things that over here in the Bay Delta, just the kind of state of knowledge, synthesis kind of work that you've been able to do on a regular basis, we have not been able to do that, and that I think is something which would be very value added and would really help with that communication piece at the end. I think a lot of the folks who are very concerned about the problems in coastal Louisiana don't really understand how much we know about it and then what we don't know about it. Our folks are very, I say our folks, that I'm not talking about the Water Institute, I'm talking about the community of scientists and researchers in coastal Louisiana, are very active in going after kind of standard things like NSF. But you know, if you've been on a review panel for the National Science Foundation, or you've been subject to review by the National Science Foundation, you know that the reviewers are not always interested in the kind of things that it takes to actually move restoration forward. And so it's challenging. I mean, I think there are opportunities there. The SEAS program, coupled human natural, there are some good opportunities there, but it's tough. The thing that we have yet to kind of realize that we are finally getting serious about is program level adaptive management. And I think that is really, so, come back in 3 years, I'd be happy to have that discussion about whether or not we've actually really managed to use that as a unifying concept for the science enterprise. I mean, I think there's a lot of promise in that, depending on how we think about it. But that for me will be the real test of how that really plays out. As we move forward. Now we've got billions of dollars to spend on this coast. We have a responsibility as a society to use that wisely and to have those decisions informed by science and to have that as a continuing process. And so that is going to be a kind of watch this space for coastal Louisiana. That's it.
We have time for a couple of questions.
Just on time.
Steve?
Hi, can you tell us a little bit more about that integrated compartment model, how it was started, who funded it? Can you tell us a little more about the integrated compartment model and tell us how it was started, who funded it, how long it lasted?
Yeah, I can. Probably too much. But so there's a little story here, right? So one of the reasons I stepped through all those previous plans was that there were a number of us in the university community, coastal researchers, who had been trying over the years to engage in these processes and trying to help. And certainly in the Louisiana Coastal Area Study in 2004, had really tried to apply what research models are available. So when this challenge came up as I described, like, how do I work out, which are the best projects to do? It was like, well, can you do this? And so we're like, so I can distinctly remember having a conversation with one of my colleagues at the University of Louisiana Lafayette saying, look, if we're going to do this, we can't do it the way we've done it before, right? We have to simplify. We have to do this, and so there was a number of networking discussions amongst people about, if we were going to do it like this, would you do it? It's not quite as fulfilling as doing that kind of really well-defined, very detailed, very process-based research kind of modeling. It's not as fulfilling as that, but are you interested in doing it? And so there were enough folks that were interested in doing it, and the state at that time, the folks in the governor's office, were sufficiently motivated that I would say for the 2012 Coastal Master Plan, the modeling probably was similarly of the order of $10 million, but we were building these things from scratch at that point. The money came from the state, and everybody who worked on it, including the federal agencies, got, was paid to work on it. So the money came from the state we have a trust fund for coastal. So it was the same money that could otherwise have gone to building a project, went to doing this. It was money in the state trust fund. So it came about by people being willing to do it was I think a really important part of it. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Tracy?
Thanks, Denise. I'm following on Steve's question. I'm curious. You've got the model built, and you've got some really large diversions you're talking about. Are those outcomes, those recommended projects and points of diversion and volumes, are those generally accepted in the region, or is it highly controversial? It seemed like it was pretty much, here's what we're going to do, here's what makes sense. And I'm just curious if other people are saying, no, is it really a contentious issue for the region as to where these diversions might go in to build more land?
So the story with the diversions is that the idea had been in all those previous plans that I outlined, the idea had been. In the 2012 plan, the simple compartment model kind of analysis identified that 4 or 5, quite a few of them actually, were worth doing. They weren't the only things in the plan, right? But they kind of rose to the top. And then there's another more detailed set of analysis, right? Which is the kind of the Delft modeling and chasm and things like that. So, but there was at one point in the presentation, there was a kind of complex slide with all these kind of decision boxes on which was really the state trying to move towards a decision on what they were going to do with these. The current thinking of the state government, and as articulated very, very clearly by the governor's coastal lead, just as last week, was we are going to do these diversions. We are going to work through some of these issues, but we are going to do these diversions. And so there are concerns that and so this is also a story of evolving science, right? When you do a simple model, you can't get into all of the details, right? You've got a very generalized picture of what's going to happen. As we get more and more into the details of these things, we apply more sophisticated tools. We can look at things in more detail. We explore actually how you operate a diversion like this to maximize land building. And so we are now looking at kind of optimizing the operation to maximize sediment delivery and minimize freshwater input, and how you can do that at different times of year. And so there's this kind of continuing role for the analysis. It's not like, okay, it's in the master plan, now the engineers are going to go on and build it. As you get into all of these further issues, then there's more and more analysis needed. I think that the piece that we, despite some, I was saying earlier that sometimes I felt like the boards were a little constrained, and that scientists and expert panels and at least external people were making very good suggestions and they were being ignored. The kind of social impact analysis side of this, which is what is going to happen to the commercial fishery and the people whose livelihoods depend on it, has not yet been analyzed or in a lot of detail. That the EIS for those projects is just going out, being competed, and so the idea is that the social impact assessment part of the EIS will be quite thorough, but that has yet to be proven. So I think that I didn't spend a lot of time talking about where the social science came into this. There is a large part of the master plan which is about hurricane storm damage risk reduction and things like that, where there is economic analysis of storm damages done, but that's not the same as quite the same as livelihoods and displaced fisheries.
I think one more.
Lauren's got her hand up.
Oh, I have a mic too.
She's got the talking stick.
Is this
Lauren's
on?
got the talking stick.
Hi, Denise.
Okay.
I was just curious, are these being designed as explicit adaptive management experiments? And also, I was curious in your slide about the decision-making, who the decision makers are. So it's kind of two questions, but that's an issue we have in adaptive management around here is who are the decision makers anyway?
Yeah, so I would, you've probably heard Dave Marmarick talk about adaptive management a number of times, many of us have, but this, there's only one Mississippi River and there's only one basin, and so this is not going to be an adaptive management experiment. We are not going to experiment with $1 billion of valuable resources. That is not the terminology that will be used. I think these are great opportunities for us, because there's a knob, right, that you can turn it. You can turn it on and you can turn it off, and you can have it half open or you can have it full open. And so I think that there is a great opportunity with the development of the operational plans and like the master manual or whatever there will be for these to ensure that the decision making is nimble in response to changing system conditions. And so one thing we have developed at the Institute, so this is a tout for the Institute, is we've developed a real-time forecasting system for those basins, whereby using the Delft model for the platform, where we get the river forecast from the National Weather Service, we get the Gulf forecast, we have enough real-time streams of data coming from some of these stations across the coast that we can now do, and we can get it operational, so that we can look at what the water level and salinity conditions, at least in those basins, will be in for the next week if you do this, or for the next week if you do that. And so we think that again, this is something where, if people want to be able to make real-time adaptive management decisions, the science is there. We can do that. Now, we haven't actually got funding to do that yet, to actually make that operational. But I do think that we are starting to move, and it's perhaps this controversy and discussion about how are these things going to be operated that may actually be the thing that stimulates the resources being available for the scientific community to respond. We would really like to move that into nutrients and harmful algal blooms. At the minute, we're a bit limited by real-time data streams for, I'm not very good at water quality parameters, let me just put it that one, within the basin, but those should be coming online soon. And so we got a little bit of foundation money from a private foundation to try and add that piece on. So to some of this is like entrepreneurial science, right? You're kind of doing it because you think it's going to be really useful, and then you're hoping somebody's going to pick it up and carry it on. As yet, they haven't done that, but not quite sure what your question was, Lauren, but I think so they're not experiments. They are not, I am not going to say that they are experiments. I shouldn't even have said the word. Because that's just not an appropriate way of framing it within our system. This system is going to hell in a handbasket, right? It's going to be all red in 50 years unless we do anything. This is not the time for experimentation. This is the time to build on our decades of science and knowledge about how this system works, to actually implement a solution with the resources we happen to have available from Deepwater Horizon. Sorry, but it's just an impossible discourse to talk about it in that kind of theoretical, kind of sciencey way. Sorry.
Thank you, Denise.
Okay.